Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you very much for joining us for this end-of-year webinar on reflecting on the year in national adaptation plans. My name is Christian Ledwell, and I'm the Knowledge Manager for the NAP Global Network Secretariat, which is hosted by the International Institute for Sustainable Development. A few housekeeping points before we get started today. This session will be 45 minutes long. Please feel free to say hello and introduce yourself by typing your name and organization into the chat box. We're recording today's session and we'll share the video and slides on our website after the webinar. And simultaneous translation into French is available, which you can access by selecting the interpretation button at the bottom of your window. If you have any questions, comments, or technical issues, please just let us know in the chat box. So the speakers on today's webinar will be Orville Gray, the NAP Global Network's Head of Secretariat, and Angie Daze, Director of Gender Equality and Social Inclusion for Resilience. Orville, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Christian. And happy to have this opportunity to interact with our partners, for everyone to understand where we are, see what has happened for us in the year that has passed or almost passed, and where we are going. Looking at the UNEP Gap report, quite a bit has come through there. You'll notice that 85% of all countries have at least one national adaptation planning instrument. And this gap report covers both developed and developing countries. But one of the things to note here is that on the developing country side, it's about 89 to 90% of those countries that have a national adaptation planning instrument in place. Over 50% of countries have 2 or more national level instruments. In some cases, it's sectoral adaptation plan or subnational adaptation plan in alignment with the national adaptation plan. Adaptation project sizes continue to grow. This is expected. And although their numbers have stagnated for the past decade, what we anticipate in the future is that as more NAPs come on stream, as more adaptation investment pipelines come on stream, we'll start to see those numbers grow. The challenge, of course, will be in terms of support. Gender and social inclusion was poorly addressed in adaptation actions, and this is an area that the NAP Global Network is working very hard with our partner countries to ensure that there is a greater understanding of why gender and social inclusion needs to be part of the adaptation planning process and how to integrate that at all levels. The adaptation gap report concludes that global adaptation action is slow on financing, slow on planning, and slow on implementation. Again, we preface this information by saying that in terms of financing, we've noted, for instance, that the adaptation fund is in the process of in getting a new replenishment. The Green Climate Fund has received a new replenishment, which seems to be much larger than the previous. The GEF is also providing even greater support, and bilateral partners are working with their country partners to provide even greater support. The private sector is getting a greater understanding of where we are, and we anticipate that we'll see more financing and hence more implementation in the years to come. In terms of the National Adaptation Planning process, again, this is where for us at NAP Global Network, we put adaptation at the heart of decision making because it applies at the local level. Again, when you look at the NAP process, it's about identifying and addressing medium and long-term priorities. It's about helping countries to be able to assess their risks, identify and prioritize these options, and implement the options to secure resilience. There's also the aspect of being in a position to track and measure progress in a very measurable way. And from this perspective, be able to put in place monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems. Emphasis on the learning aspect, because adaptation planning is going to be iterative, and we want to be able to learn as we go, correct our mistakes, and be able to strengthen the systems and peoples in place. So it's all about putting in place the systems and capacities to make this part of the regular development planning process and budgeting processes for our countries so that we can understand what is required to build the resilience that's required, and in terms of the types of projects that we anticipate to come on stream, hopefully in a programmatic approach to build that iterative adaptation process. In terms of the momentum on NAP, quite a bit has happened over the past year. There's been an increase in the number of countries that have been identified, developing countries that is, with a NAP process on the way. According to the UNFCCC, we're now 142 of 154 countries. The number of NAPs being submitted to the UNFCCC has also increased. We're now up to 52 NAPs, including one sectoral adaptation plan. I think this one was by Uruguay. And of the 52 that have been submitted, at least 23 are from LDCs. So quite a bit is happening in this space. With the support that has been provided by the Green Climate Fund, which has supported up to 92 countries so far and over 103 plus proposals, we anticipate that there will be more NAP documents being finalized and submitted to the UNFCCC during the course of 2024. So we are expecting an even greater number based on the fact that we have now gone past the worst of the COVID-19, and hopefully we are back on track in terms of the formulation and implementation of these adaptation planning programs. Now we want to, share the spotlight in terms of the good side, the people side, what has been happening in some of our partner countries. And in this respect, we're going to highlight 3 countries. So the first up is Haiti. Now, Haiti submitted its first NAP to the UNFCCC in 2023. And in this NAP, there's quite a bit that has been detailed there. And we are very supportive of the government in Haiti, knowing their challenges in being able to get this process done with the help of the UNDP. What is expected in terms of the cost for implementing that National Adaptation Plan is $980 million. This is quite a significant sum, but Haiti is already on their way to building that resilience. They have secured approximately USD 31.3 million from the GCF, with UNDP also as their partner, to enhance climate resilience through integrated flood management in the Rivière-Troy region in the north section of Haiti. In December of this year, Haiti completed a gender analysis supported by NAP Global Network. And in this respect, there's quite a bit that is happening here that we need to take stock of and be supportive of as Haiti moves along this process, especially as this is one area that was flagged in the adaptation gap report as being weak. So the fact that Haiti was able to build this into their systems, I believe, highlights the significant progress that we're making. In Kenya, there's also quite a bit happening here. The lady that you're seeing on the screen is utilizing what is referred to as a water pan in Kenya. This is one of those things that have been prioritized in the NAP, and something that is very important to not only being able to address the work that's being done in the agricultural sector, but also be able to provide water for the homes. Kenya submitted its first NAP to the UNFCCC in 2017, and this came as part of the first National Climate Change Action Plan, NCAP. Kenya is currently finalizing its third NCAP with support from the NAP Global Network, and this is looking at dealing with the climate impacts that have come on stream, including the prolonged drought that the country has experienced. It's interesting that this drought is something that has been going on for quite a significant period. So the fact that this is very much highlighted and not just formulated and identified in their NAP, but also being implemented, goes to the strength of the work that's being done in Kenya. We are also pleased to support the revision and development of the third National Climate Change Action Plan that will implement the actions for the NAP, which goes out to 2030. Notably, Kenya is making important progress on subnational adaptation financing as well. Beyond that, the country is also tapping into, other funding mechanisms to be able to provide significant support, including the Country Climate Change Funds mechanism and the Climate Financing Locally Led Climate Action Program. In Tonga, a small island developing SIDS, there's quite a bit there that we are very happy to report on in terms of progress being made. Tonga was one of the first Pacific countries to develop a joint national action plan. This is essentially their national adaptation plan, and it takes into consideration the disaster risk management aspects that have been formulated prior in 2010. They're currently implementing their second JNAP, and this one goes out to 2028. And among those priorities being implemented, one of the things that is very important looking at Tonga as a SIDS is the protection of its coastline, and especially where they have mangroves, to build the resilience of those ecosystems to provide the respective support that's required to support countries, livelihoods, and lives. In this aspect, they're working towards their goal of 1 million trees across the country. To support Tonga's capacity building efforts, the NAP Global Network has supported 3 embedded advisors to support the JNAP Secretariat through 2023. And we are happy to note that these positions became permanent on the government payroll as of the end of this year. So we're looking forward to seeing these 3 persons provide even greater support to the advancement of national adaptation planning in Tonga. And, just to round out where we are and, what the NAP Global Network has been doing, I'm sure many of you are aware of some of these statistics. In terms of supporting national level action on NAP development and implementation, in 2023 alone, we have been supporting 35 developing countries to provide direct technical support. So this pushes our numbers up to 63 developing countries to date. In terms of how we're helping countries to learn from each other through South-South peer learning and exchange, in 2023, we have supported 21 countries. And this is also pushing our numbers up in terms of the number of persons that we've been able to support in this sort of exchange program, in over 400 persons and from 65 countries to date. And of course, we're also in the business of being able to assist in the learning aspect. So in terms of generating, synthesizing, and sharing knowledge on the NAP process, we have developed over 300 knowledge materials to date, with at least 30 of these being produced in 2023. Significant in this aspect would have been our report on virtual integration in the NAP process, the peace building guidance that has now about to be published, and other work that we're supporting as we go forward. We're transitioning into 2024, where we're hoping to be able to do even more work in terms of understanding what is happening in the space of climate finance, but also looking at how we've been learning from each other across the NAP processes as we go forward to help countries to strengthen their processes. So this gives an overview of where we are, countries that we've supported, good practices that we've seen, and progress made as we advance in terms of the formulation and implementation of NAPs, and from the support that the NAP Global Network has been able to offer to countries in this space. Over to you, Christian.
Thanks very much, Orville. So as Orville mentioned, under our knowledge pillar, the NAP Global Network hosts the NAP Trends platform, which aims to make information on national adaptation plans easily accessible and digestible for the climate change adaptation community. On the NAP Trends platform, you can see overviews of NAP documents by countries. You can take a look through trends in NAP documents, and you can also explore key themes related to adaptation planning across the across the NAP documents that have been submitted to the UNFCCC. All of the data on NAP Trends currently is for multi-sector national adaptation plans as of the end of November. And through this year, we've seen really strong numbers in terms of the number of NAP submissions to the UNFCCC. There have been already this month 2 additional NAPs submitted by Burundi and the Republic of Marshall Islands, which will be reflected on the platform soon. So as you can see at the top of the slide, there's been a marked increase in the number of NAPs submitted to the UNFCCC over the last 3 years. In the second chart, you can see the regional breakdown, with African countries leading on NAP submissions. So I'll now pass to Angie Daze, Director of Gender Equality and Social Inclusion for Resilience at IASD. Angie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Christian, and thanks, Orville, for that great overview of where we're at on NAPs. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of what we're seeing in terms of integration of gender in the NAP documents. We're highlighting this because, this was flagged as an issue in the Adaptation Gap Report, and obviously it's fundamental for effective and sustainable adaptation. So when we look at the NAP documents that were submitted to the UNFCCC as of the end of November, we find that all but one of these documents mention gender in the body of the National Adaptation Plan. And we also look at the way that gender is mentioned. And what we found is that more than half of the documents mention gender as one of the guiding principles and or as a priority adaptation sector or option. And to give one example, Timor-Leste prioritized in its NAP the short-term need to develop guidelines to enable its NAP process to address gender issues. And they plan to apply these guidelines in policies, projects, and programs in all sectors and at all levels, including the subnational level. These mentions of gender in the NAP documents are a really important starting point because these documents are going to guide investments in climate change adaptation over the coming years, whether it's from governments, international climate finance, or the private sector. And so what this means is that integrating the gender dimension into the framing of adaptation issues right from the outset can really provide a basis for gender responsive climate action. But of course, this is only a beginning. We need to ensure that there are efforts to put these principles and targeted actions into practice as countries move into implementation of their NAPs. We also look in our analysis of NAP documents at how women are positioned in the plans. We find that 94% of the NAP documents so far mention women. And when we look at how women are positioned, we find that more and more NAPs are positioning women as agents of change in adaptation and not just as a particularly vulnerable group. It's true that the majority of NAP documents do highlight the particular vulnerability of women due to gender inequalities, but more than half of the documents submitted so far recognize their important role in adaptation. So to give one example, Liberia's NAP states that while women are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, their unique knowledge and perspectives also offer opportunities for inclusive, equitable, and effective adaptation. So these are just a couple of examples to show how countries are integrating gender considerations into their NAPs. But it goes without saying that the publication of the NAP document is only one step in the broader process of adaptation planning and implementation. So the extent to which gender is taken into account really depends to a large extent on the decision-making processes involved in adaptation and on the institutional and political context, which may or may not create an enabling environment for addressing gender issues. So it's really important to look beyond what's written in the documents. So this is something that the NAP Global Network is working on. In addition to tracking the documents, we are working with our partners to identify and document promising examples of how countries are integrating gender considerations as they advance their NAP processes. And we put out periodic synthesis reports that analyze the trends and share good practices. I'll share the link to our last report that came out in 2022, and I'm happy to say that our next synthesis report will be coming out next year. So stay tuned for that. And I'll turn it back over to Orville. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. So, as I said, quite a bit has been happening for us in this space, and we're very happy to see, how we can continue to support these processes. One of the big highlights, of course, has been where we have been at the end of the year in terms of the COP28 and what does that mean for the NAP processes. We're happy to note that when we look at this process and where things have been going, at the COP, there was a constant reiterating of the importance for supporting the formulation and implementation of NAPs. And interestingly, quite a bit of this support has been coming from the developed countries. So this, of course, is very significant for us. We look also in terms of where the process is at. And there's a great platform for launching the NAPs and securing international support at the COP. We've been able to have conversations with many of our partner countries, and they've been able to identify where they've now been able to secure some support, including from the NAP Global Network, in terms of providing direct technical support to advancing on the implementation of the NAPs and/or other adaptation planning processes that they have on the way. The global stocktake and the global goal for adaptation has also been significant for us. In this context, quite a bit has happened. The global goal for adaptation framework sets out a target for gender-responsive NAPs. Again, highlighting the theme that we've been going on here in terms of just ensuring that this aspect is understood and recognized and is seen as being significant in the process. Because for countries that we've been working with, gender-responsive NAPs is something that they consider to be significant. Of course, among the many other areas for effectiveness that we can look at. It's interesting when we look at the challenges that the negotiations had when it came to the global goal on adaptation, as well as the global stocktake. There was quite a significant discussion on that side. And we were happy to have our colleagues that would have been able to support that process. In terms of looking at the global stocktake, for instance, one of the things to note was that it accentuated the importance of the NAP process, and it stressed the need for transitioning from planning to implementation. And of course, here, the caveat, as I'm sure many of you are aware, was that there's the need for even greater support when you recognize what has been outlined in the Adaptation Gap Report and the cost for adaptation financing and how that has mushroomed over the intervening years. But it was generally noted in terms of positively that NAPs are mentioned and developing countries have really advocated for that during the negotiations and have been supported by developed countries in recognizing the importance and the need for this to go forward. We continue to work with our developed country partners to see how we can provide additional support to our partner countries. In terms of the global goal on adaptation, as I mentioned before, we now have a goal that all parties have in place a NAP and other adaptation planning instrument by 2030. It's an ambitious ask, but one that we believe is quite achievable. And we do anticipate this to happen long before 2030. But what is going to be important is for us to look at not just the formulation of these NAPs, but how they're going to be implemented over time. And what does this mean in terms of the development of a clear roadmap, as well as how we're going to address the issue of doubling the adaptation finance that's going to be required to support these ambitious NAPs that are coming on stream, including those NAPs that are being updated based on the first set that came out. So these are some of the feedback that we want to take from the global stocktake and the global goal and adaptation as we move into 2024 and beyond. And the NAP Global Network will be working with our partner countries as well as our partner organizations to ensure that we can strengthen this process and provide the required technical assistance and capacity building efforts to support the advancement and implementation of adaptation priorities in these countries. Over to you, Christian.
Thanks so much, Orville. So we wanted to leave lots of time on this webinar for questions, responses, and comments from all of you who've joined us today. Seeing lots of colleagues and friends names in the participant list. So please do feel free to share a comment or a question in the chat in either English or French. If you'd like to take the floor, please just raise your hand and I can see if I can work out the technical details on this side. But just to start with a first question for Angie. Thanks so much for that readout on the year in review. So I wanted to ask you, Angie, what's for you personally, what's the most exciting story that came out of 2023 for integrating gender and social inclusion in national adaptation plan processes? Thanks.
Thanks, Christian. So I think I'm going to point to a partner country that we've been working with for a number of years now, Cote d'Ivoire. And they started with a gender analysis to inform their NAP process back in 2019. And I think what's really interesting is they weren't even really starting to work on their NAP document at that point. But they felt it was really important to undertake this analysis to understand the context for gender responsive climate action in the country as a basis for embarking on their NAP process. And so since 2019, they've gone about it in a really thoughtful way as they've worked through the different steps of the NAP process. They've really focused on the enabling environment. So they've worked on capacity building for integrating gender in adaptation action. They've set up institutional arrangements, including a national platform that brings together gender and climate actors. They've gotten support at the political level through an MOU that's been signed between the two ministries that are responsible for gender and climate action, respectively. And they're currently in the process of finalizing and validating actually their NAP document, and which incorporates the learning from this journey that they've been on over the last few years of really thoughtfully and systematically integrating gender considerations in the NAP process. And I think this is a really exciting story because what this shows is that they're very well positioned as they move into implementation of the NAP because they've really worked on laying this foundation and putting the enabling factors in place over the last few years.
Thanks so much, Angie. Orville, the next question is for you to put you on the hot seat. We have a tough question from our colleague Alaide, who asks, some countries have chosen not to submit their NAP documents to the UNFCCC yet. What do you think the reasons could be for not seeing all of the national adaptation plans that we know are in place formally submitted to the UNFCCC?
Thanks, Olaide. Yeah, that's a very good one. There are quite a number of reasons. We've seen, for instance, transitions in government. One of the challenges with this is that the new governments coming in would want to ensure that the national adaptation plan that has been developed is aligned with their plans and how they intend to take their countries. So in some cases, that has been one of the challenge. In other cases, sometimes they've developed an app based on the funding that was available, but then they recognize that there are critical elements that may have been missing, and some of this came about maybe because of expert advice that have been given on the draft map that was developed, and the challenge has been finding additional resources to now try and address some of those loopholes. In other cases, I think some countries have done their NAP. It's in a good position to be submitted, but they've been so focused on the implementation of the priority actions that the minor step of just having it submitted to the UNFCCC has been overlooked. So in this case, we have been working with many of our partner countries where we've seen areas where they do have a NAP in place but have not yet submitted, to encourage them to be able to submit these NAPs so that they can have recognition of the work that they're doing. And I guess the last point I'd raise on this is that there are a few countries that have subnational or sectoral NAPs, and it's probably just a matter of communication that they may not have recognized that they could submit these documents or even other proxy documents to the UNFCCC to be recognized as a NAP in progress, and one that can highlight what the country is doing and what are their priority areas. So again, this is another area that we're working with our partner countries to try to address this gap and bring recognition to the work that they have done in country.
Thanks, Orville. So then the next question is from our colleague Chi, who's asking, what does the NAP Global Network plan to do in 2024 on peer learning and peer exchange? This can be for either you, Orville, or for Angie.
Okay, thanks, G. Yes, for 2024, we do have quite a packed schedule in terms of peer learning and exchange. We have a global peer learning event coming up in end of February I think it's in Zimbabwe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Christian. But we're looking here to potentially bring together about 15 countries, including the host, among and in addition to a few of our partner organizations to look at what is happening in the context of planning to implementation, which is one of the core areas that we're refining as we go forward. So we'll be bringing countries together that already have a NAP in place and have been advancing on the implementation of that NAP to understand what are some of the challenges being experienced and how we can support them and how countries can learn from each other in that space to take it forward. In the third quarter of next year, we are also doing a regional peer learning exchange, and this one will be done in Vietnam. So we'll be looking to pull countries together from that space. And again, in terms of the learning that we expect to happen here, the focus will be likely on monitoring, evaluation, and learning in NAPS. And we'll be looking to, pull together quite a number of countries from that region to share lessons learned and how we can support each other in strengthening their mail systems for NAPS in that region. It will also be a space in terms of both peer learning events, a space for us to understand where we can twin countries to be able to help them to work together, understand where they are in the processes. The anticipation is that many of this will take place between countries that may share a geographic border or within a particular geographic space. And from that perspective, for them to be able to have the sort of facilitated support to have engagements between countries and get their NAP teams to speak with each other. And from that perspective, learn from each other as they go forward. So those are two peer learning events that we have on the agenda for next year. And I'm sure there's going to be a couple more that will be taking place.
Thanks so much, Orville. So our next question is from Emily Smale, who is the Executive Director of the Group on Earth Observations Ocean and Coastal Initiative, Geo Blue Planet. So Emily's question is, does the UNFCCC review and provide feedback on the national adaptation plans do they provide feedback on submitted national adaptation and sectoral NAPs?
I take it that one is also for me.
Yes, please.
No worries. In general, I from the leg, that's the least expert group that supports the LDC countries. I know for a fact that they do allow for NAPs to be shared with the team and for us to provide partner organizations to provide feedback on those NAPs to strengthen them prior to submission to the UNFCCC. We would have to check with the UNFCCC to see if they're doing something similar with respect to all NAPs that are submitted. But I know for the LDCs, they do have that window of support through the leg of the UNFCCC to get some feedback prior to submitting their NAPs. But beyond that, the NAP Global Network also provides expert review and feedback to partner countries that request this sort of support. So we're also in a position to support countries in giving them feedback to advance their adaptation planning processes in countries.
Thanks, Orville. So to go back to the previous question on South-South peer learning and exchange. So in 2022, Andrew, you led a peer learning summit that brought together NAP focal points and gender focal points in Jamaica to share on how to better integrate gender into the NAP process. And this year you developed a briefing note on gender analysis for NAP process that looked at some of the stories and next steps that came out of that peer learning summit. So I was wondering if you could speak to how you saw the participants in that peer learning event taking their lessons and learning forward this year.
Thanks so much. So the briefing note really reflected on how countries have used gender analysis to inform their NAP processes. And it's true that many of the participants in the peer learning event had actually undertaken gender analysis or were in the process actually at the point of the event. And I think what the peer learning event really helped countries to do was translate sort of the analysis that they had undertaken into concrete actions that they could take in their NAP processes. So we talked a lot about stakeholder engagement and the importance of participation, of representatives of different groups, including, gender actors and other underrepresented groups in decision making around adaptation. We talked a lot about sort of the importance of keeping gender and social inclusion at the center as we transition to implementation of NAP processes, or sorry, of NAPs, and the priorities that they contain. That this is not just something to be captured in a NAP document, but something that needs to be at the center as we move into implementation. And the importance of the institutional arrangements, I think, that need to be set up to make sure that there's sort of ongoing access to gender expertise, at the national level, but also looking at subnational levels, and the role that, actors outside government, including civil society experts and women's groups and researchers working on gender and climate issues can play in moving these issues, these priorities forward throughout implementation.
Great, thank you, Angie. My next question, Orville, you spoke to a photo story that was developed in Kenya that profiled different responses that have been prioritized through the Kenyan National Adaptation Plan to respond to climate risks like the prolonged drought that Kenya's been enduring. We've supported a number of partners to develop photo stories to try to profile NAP implementation this year. And we've also, if you follow the NAP Global Network, you've no doubt heard about the Envisioning Resilience initiative, where we've partnered with the NGO Lensational to work on photo storytelling on adaptation for underrepresented women and marginalized groups to better tell the story of adaptation. Orville, how do you see these types of local stories helping inform national level decision making? And what do you think that we can do in the year to come to continue supporting this type of storytelling?
Thanks, Christian. Well, let me answer the last part first. What we can do to continue supporting is essentially just continue supporting. I think it's very important for us to understand what is happening in that space in countries and for us to continue supporting that. The work that we're doing with Lensational and with Angie as our lead has been amazing. And I think the beauty of that is it helps to give countries a chance to have the story of what is happening at the local level be broadcast beyond the local level. You make mention of, the work that's being done in Kenya. It's interesting that, when we talk about, for instance, the water pans in Kenya, the prolonged drought in Kenya, these are things that people in Kenya know and understand well. But beyond the communities and borders may not necessarily be that easy to understand. So, bringing these photo essays and or other pieces together and spreading the information beyond the borders helps to paint the bigger picture. It helps to put things in perspective and give relevance to what is happening at the local level and why that work is important. Because when you see it just in text, it can only go so far. But the photo essays, it also gives a chance for people at the local level to speak to their experiences and what the national adaptation planning process means for them. And it also helps in terms of the support that needs to go into the process for monitoring, evaluation, and learning in NAPs, as well as vertical integration in the NAP process. This will help to strengthen the adaptation planning processes, particularly as countries advance from adaptation planning into implementation.
Thanks, Orville. And I think, Angie, in speaking with you at COP28, I think you had a really great insight about how these stories are an important form of qualitative data to complement the quantitative data that initiatives like GEO are supporting. So would you be able to kind of speak to what you were thinking there?
Sure. Thanks. And, I think envisioning resilience is one of the more exciting aspects of the work, as Orville had mentioned. And to me, it's exciting for a few reasons. I think that we've been able to form partnerships with organizations that are very interesting and are new types of partners for the NAP Global Network. So our core partner for envisioning resilience, as Orville mentioned, is an organization called Lensational. But we've also worked in Jamaica with Girls Care, which is a young women-led organization that mentors other young women as climate activists. And we've just launched the initiative in Rwanda, where we're working with the Rwanda Women's Network. And so these partnerships are really interesting because these are voices that are very important in NAP processes, and the initiative is finding a way to sort of bring them into the conversation about adaptation, and also providing tools that help to sort of bridge different knowledge systems around adaptation and climate change and what it means for people and their livelihoods. So I think that's a really interesting aspect. And then I think the other reflection that I had is that these photos, these narratives that are developed through envisioning resilience are really a form of qualitative data. They are, data that is collected and presented by communities, people on the front lines of climate change. And that's a really important complement to the more scientific data. I mean, we know that adaptation needs to be informed by both scientific and indigenous and or traditional knowledge. And so these photos are one form of documenting this local knowledge that's really important for informing how adaptation goes forward, if it's going to be inclusive and genuinely meet the needs of the people who are on the front lines of the climate crisis.
Thanks so much, Angie. Great. Well, we have time for, I think, one last question. And so this question came from our colleague, Pablo, who asked, considering the local level perspective can be very challenging, what activities do you recommend in order to have an output that is representative, unbiased, and inclusive in a reasonable time span?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. Sorry, Orville, did you want to take it?
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah, I'll come in after you, Angie.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can have a lot of debate about what representative means, what inclusive means, and what's a reasonable time span. But I think my immediate response is that I think we need, for me, the power is in the combination of sort of quantitative, hard data, more scientific methodologies, and these more participatory, locally led, qualitative types of data. To me, that it's the combination of the two that should really set the way forward, because I think numbers are very important, and they're important for convincing decision makers, and they are, quote unquote unbiased. But we also need to understand the stories and the experiences and the people behind the numbers. So I think that both are important, and it's the combination of the two that is really powerful. Orville.
Thanks, Angie. And to add to that, Pablo, traditional knowledge is something that is sometimes overlooked. But as we've noted in many of the national adaptation plans that have been submitted, it's something that many countries have identified as being important and something that needs to be factored in their adaptation planning processes. This traditional knowledge is going to come from the local level. And as Angie mentioned, it's going to be a part of that qualitative data that is going to be required to support the process and to ensure that there's a way for that data to feed into the adaptation planning processes from the local to the subnational to the national level, stressing hard on the vertical integration of information, not just on how decisions are made at the national level down, but also in terms of what data is available at the local level that can feed into the process to design those priority adaptation actions. Without a doubt, in terms of getting that data and in terms of it being unbiased, there's always going to be the challenge with that and how it fits into a national process. And in terms of inclusive time, a reasonable time frame, that's always going to be a challenge because in many cases, when we talk about adaptation and some of the work that needs to be done, it's something that needs to be done as of yesterday. And so, the question is, how can we continue to support countries to identify where, this data resides, where these actions need to be taken, and help them to package it in a manner that can support the adaptation planning process in a fairly reasonable time frame, maybe within the scope of the national development plans in countries and or those medium economic evaluations that are done every 2 to 3 years, or whatever is being done at the subnational level in terms of provincial adaptation planning and budgeting and necessary steps that need to be taken. I guess that's the best that I can put on it for now, but I'm happy to continue having this conversation because it's an area that we hope to be able to continue supporting in every way possible. But without a doubt, I think, amplifying some of this work through the photo essays, for instance, and the work that we're doing with partners such as Lensational is a critical way to pull decision makers into the loop and to be able and for them to be able to take some of this information on board in their planning processes.
Great, thank you, Orville. And I think actually we have one final question to close out this webinar from our colleague, Hoda Bello. He asks, have there been changes recently in the UNFCCC in terms of the format of elaboration of NAPs or the formulation of NAPs?
Not to my knowledge. I think the guidance that still exists is the NAP technical guidelines that have been published. What is happening now is that they are working on an implementation guidance to support the NAP formulation guidance. So that is likely to come out sometime in 2024, and hopefully that will help to inform the process in terms of elaboration of the NAPs, particularly as it goes towards the implementation phase. So maybe that is one aspect that you can look forward. But in terms of the structure of the NAPs, because it's iterative, because it's country-driven and country-specific, it's still up to countries to decide how best to use the guidance that's available to support the formulation of their national adaptation planning processes in whatever form that they choose to take.
Great, thank you, Orville. So if there are no further questions, we'll now close the webinar. Don't hesitate to contact us on the email that's shown on the screen here. If you're not already a member of the NAP Global Network, please do feel free to sign up and join and to follow us on social media. Thank you so much again for joining us. We're wishing you all a very restful and rejuvenating end of the year and all the best for 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the season.